Shalom, family. Welcome to the Way of Yah. Today we're sitting down with Zion Lexx, one of our brothers from the Israelite community, who is known for his ability to not only translate ancient texts, but also defend his faith on various debatable subjects. Today we're discussing a few topics, such as the Merneptah Stele, is David king in the kingdom, and what are some things the Israelites and Christians are missing in their studies. Without further ado, Zion Lexx. How did you come into this belief, and kind of walk us up from that point, to where we are today?
First and foremost, giving all praise, all honor to the Holy One of Israel, the God of our ancient forefathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the true and the living God, even the Most High God. He is our creator, our maker, our owner, and our possessor, and to him belongs the life of all worlds. Having said that, I also want to thank you for the opportunity to be on your show, The Way of Yah. It's an immense opportunity whenever I'm afforded the time and space to share this kind of information, especially on this level, on an Israelite platform. That's an added honor. So I thank you for that. As it pertains to my awakening in the community, as it were, I'll be 42 in a couple of months, God willing, and I came into this way of life at age 14. So we're talking about the years about 1994, early 94, about February of 1994 to be exact. All right. This was before Facebook, before MySpace, before YouTube, when everything was, encyclopedias and libraries, where the only way you got information was from the people in your immediate environment, your school, or that brother or sister on them corners that had knowledge of self, as it were. Right. So therein began my awakening. And when I came into the Israelite community at that age, I was so young and so fresh. Um, a lot of these things caught me by surprise because I had no idea that we were the people of the Bible. I, like many others, were victim of the white supremacist idea that spirituality is a white man's thing. I, like many others, had grandparents who, when you went to their homes, you saw a white picture of Jesus on the wall. So seeing these white images of Jesus, going to predominantly churches where I always saw white pastors, even though I've obviously also visited churches with black pastors. But you got to understand, from my era, being a kid, a child that's born in the 70s, I remember that white pastors dominated here in the East, in the North, here in New York City. So that's all I was exposed to. And coming into this information at such a young age and realizing that not only is it incorrect to view spirituality as a Eurocentric thing, but to now come into full understanding that this is what our ancestors birthed. And then I think the greatest surprise or knowledge of all that came to me at this moment in my history was to find out that there was a cause and there was a reason and there was a plan, as it were, behind the capturing and the enslavement of the African peoples who were sent throughout the African diaspora. You know, most of
So,
us question these things.
so you're in agreement with the Deuteronomy 28:68 conversation.
Absolutely. I believe that Deuteronomy 28:68 provides ample amount of attestation and evidence even before the crime happens, because the transatlantic slave trade, we must remember, is the kidnapping and enslavement of our people. That's how we need to refer to it as. That's what it is. It's the
Mhm.
kidnapping and enslavement of our people. So yes, I use verses like that to validate our history, those events that happened to us.
How important is it to know the language in order to understand what the Most High Yah expects of us?
It's so important. Learning biblical Hebrew is so important to understanding what the Creator has revealed and left on record. It's tantamount to saying, without this, you're left illiterate to that which is left on record.
Mhm.
And some people might say, well, no, I can read the English. But the English only provides but thus much information. One thing we have to realize is that when a literary work is in composition, and then it's so great that it comes into other language via translations. There's a saying that exists among literary translations, and it goes such: things become lost in translation. Most of us know this. There are a lot of words in English that cannot properly capture what biblical Hebrew words are saying. So, no matter how well studied you are in the Bible in English, without that biblical Hebrew foundation, which is the original language that the Bible was written in, there are so many concepts that you are just scratching the surface on, and you have yet to have seen the full depth of it. So many of us who have, scavenged the text and, you know, composed our ideas based on what we're reading and then utilize Hebrew, the first thing we immediately realize is that with a Hebraic understanding, the Bible comes alive in ways that is quite literally unimaginable.
Man, powerful, powerful. That's exactly how I felt, bro. And especially coming from, the Adventist world, we already kind of felt as though we have the message because we keep the Sabbath. And that's
Mm,
and that was something that we prided ourselves on, was the fact that we are Sabbath keepers versus
mhm,
first day keepers. And so now that I'm reading this, I'm like, wait a minute, there's so much more that I've been missing out on, especially
mhm.
when it comes to Easter and Passover. And so we just had Passover not too long ago. And so but what is it, what else do you feel that the Christian community is missing, that if they only took heed to this would make a big difference within their life?
So one thing that the Christian community is definitely missing, and I think I can even, to an extent, say a greater part of the Israelite community is also missing, is tying in the written text with the oral tradition. It's so very important to understand that before something is committed to writing, it's first transmitted via oral tradition. So even the book of Chronicles, we say Chronicles in English, but if we read Hebrew, you'd realize it's literally saying oral tradition.
Wow.
The word for Chronicles in biblical Hebrew is divrei yamim, which stands for ancient words or words of the days, meaning that which was recorded in the book of Chronicles stems from the oral traditions which were orally passed down. The words. That's why you find extra history in Chronicles that you don't find anywhere in the book of Kings, because oral tradition always provides more information than any literary text. This is why when we read in the Bible, and if you want more information on this particular story, go into the book of Joshua. If the Bible was written with the aim and purpose of being a history book, it would not send you outside. It would not outsource you for information. Everything would be right here. You see, the Bible, while it contains history, and in fact, it contains the most accurate history upon the face of the world, its aim is to be a moral guide which uses various historical occurrences to teach about morality. We have it twisted. We think the Bible is a history book because there's so much accurate history there. And there's some truth to it, because the Bible is actually used on many archaeological sites and digs for several centuries now. However, the aim of the book is not to be a history book, because if that's the case, you would find dates. If that's the case, you would find far more details. So the aim of the book is to take these histories which have occurred and it is to use them as a moral guide. The Bible is not something which once occurred. The Bible is not or should not be relegated simply as history, us looking back at something that once occurred. The Bible is a moral guide. So every time you look at it, it's speaking something to you today. And if we're reading it any other way, we're missing the point.
Your tours within the museums, if we don't connect the Bible to that part of the history, then we're missing so much.
Oh
Why is
yeah.
that important, and why do you do the tours?
So the museum tours for me started about 3 years ago. I visited museums, several decades ago, but to actually conduct a tour is a different experience, a different beast entirely. And one thing I realize in the Israelite community that's lacking is our ability to marry the historical record with the biblical narratives. It's good to know the Bible, to even be able to quote it, and better yet, to actually live it. However, if you don't know how to look into the secular historical record to see where the biblical narrative is validated as being historical, we are in trouble. Because the same people who speak of the Bible as history, they tend to do a horrible job showing the historicity of it. So if I say Moses, you should automatically know what century we're talking about. If I say the Exodus and I'm speaking to someone who is a scholar or student of the Bible, you should be able to tell me the date of the Exodus. These things have to be known if we're going to speak about the Bible as history. I mean, if you just regard it as a religious or spiritual text void of history, then sure, do as you please. But the moment you say it's history, there's things that go along with validating it as history. So the museum tours began 3 years ago for me, where I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I first went as an observer. I joined tours and I observe what's going on. I'm the person that I'll watch until I get it myself. So I attended several tours. I walked the length of the museum at this point, well over 1,000 times. I've been to the Metropolitan Museum in particular well over 1,000 times, to the point where when they see me, they know me by first name. The thing that drove me to do this is I wanted to arm our community with the ability to be tangible with the evidences which validate the biblical narrative as history. And so far, it's been amazing, brother. I have people that flew from California to be included in my museum tours here in New York City. People that literally got on a flight for 4 to 5 hours to do a museum tour, which lasted 2 to 3 hours, and went home either that same day or the next day. Now, I don't know about them, but if I go to a nice major city, I need to stay at least 7 days. But I appreciate it. And it shows me that those people are hungry. Our people are hungry. Our people are no longer content with the status quo. The ill-treated information, the misinformation, the misappropriated information. Our people are hungry for right knowledge, true knowledge. Our people are hungry for truth. And if you call yourself a scholar, you are a shepherd. Let's feed the people the truth. We have a responsibility to do such.
Can you recall any moments of finding something in those museums or just through your studies? Because I know recently
Oh
you just bought the Merneptah Stele, right? So you invested,
yeah.
you bought that, you put money to that. You know what I'm saying? Like, how important
Mhm.
was that?
So yeah, in the last 2 years, I've been acquiring a number of artifacts, artifacts that are coming from all parts of the world. I have artifacts that are being sent to me directly from Ghana and Nigeria. I have artifacts that are coming directly from Israel. I have artifacts that are coming directly from Babylon or Mesopotamia. And of course, I've had several sent to me directly from Cairo, from Egypt. Um, this is all part of, you know, putting together those evidences that are necessary to conduct these tours. One of the things that blew my mind away to see in the museum was one day about maybe 4 years ago, before I started doing the tours, there was a label in the museum that said early Hebrews. But when I looked at the depiction of who the early Hebrews were, I immediately had to do this in a limited way. Because maybe I'm not seeing clearly. Because these men were darker than me. This is a picture that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has, a painting of what's described as the early Hyksos and the early Amu Asiatics coming into ancient Kemet or Egypt as slaves and as men bearing tribute. The irony of that is exactly how the biblical narrative describes how we entered Egypt. Joseph comes by himself as a slave. Later
Mm,
on, his brothers come bearing goods. So when you look at this painting, which is referred to as the Khnum Hotep II tomb scenery. This is where the painting was found. The painting was found in what's called the Beni Hassani tomb of Khnum Hotep II, who's a Nisut or a king which once reigned in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom period. And it's during this period that you, for the first time, begin to see a strong pictorial representation of what the early Hebrews look like. So here we are using, Exodus to say, look, when God performs a miracle in showing and declaring to Pharaoh the power and might of the God of Moses, he says to Moses, take your hand and put it in your bosom. And then when you return, it shall be white as snow. And us as Israelites, we remind everyone throughout the world that the miracle in this act is not in white skin turning whiter. The miracle in this act would obviously have been in dark skin turning white. That's the miracle, right? So, having said that, watching this painting, I immediately said to myself, we are arguing tooth and nail with people, getting them to understand and conceive that there are several places in the Bible which can spell out for you that the original people of the Bible are dark or are black. But if we go to Egypt, they got pictures of how we looked. So that blew my mind away, brother, because we can argue about a text. We can argue about translations. But how you going to argue about somebody's choice to use brown and black to depict the color of the Hebrews, especially when you know they had white paint?
Hey, boy, you tough with it, man. I love it. I love it, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Like, from the beginning, when I first started, watching videos, bro, like your videos was like one of the first ones that I started, watching. My friend, as a matter of fact, is a, he's an atheist,
Mhm.
but he was like, you need to check out this guy Zion Lexx, and so he sent me the videos or whatnot. And it's just interesting. And he sent it to me, So I was watching your video. I can't remember the one, but you were standing outside with this guy. And you was breaking down something you was breaking down. I can't remember, but it was
Mm.
tough. I said, this brother here, he know his stuff here, man. But what I wanted to ask you is that now that you're teaching classes and you're doing the tours and things like this, but some years ago you changed your position on something that's very significant within the community. I want you to kind of explain that a little bit.
Okay, so at age 14, when I came into this way of life, you have to imagine I'm a child, right? I'm now in my 40s, where ironically, to me, somebody in their 20s is a child. You see how life changes. When people that were older than us years ago would say to us as grown men in our 20s, oh, you still a child. We look at them like, you crazy? I'm a grown man. I'm 24. Get into your 40s, you're going to understand what they're saying. Having said that, being so young coming into this way of life, you have to understand my mind was a sponge. It was not so much of a sift. The difference between a sponge and a sift is that a sponge soaks up everything. But when you put something in a sift or in a drainer or strainer, you keep that which is good and you let go that which is bad. So when I came into this way of life at age 14, being so young and being a sponge in mind, I soaked up everything that my teachers said and without challenging them. And that's bad because there's no teaching that should go unchallenged. And when I mean unchallenged, I don't mean disrespectful. I don't mean being rude, but I mean when someone presents information and says that this is the truth, they have to have the ability to first demonstrate it, and you must validate it. It's a two-way street. They have to demonstrate how it's true, and then you have to go out and secularly validate it.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to a jeweler to purchase a wedding band and you make the purchase, we all know it's intelligent that you must get an appraisal. Why don't we employ that same way of thinking with the gems which come into our mind? If the gems that we put on our hands require an appraisal for validation, what about the gems that come into our minds? Having said that, when I reached about age 19 and 20, I began to challenge some of the things that I learned from my teachers. And I'm glad that I did, because it was that day that I became what my father told me a real scholar is, a free thinker. My mind was free. You are a prisoner, a slave, and a captive to someone's opinions until you validate it as being true. And it's when I began to release the bondage and the chains of captivity, mental captivity, to become a free thinker and challenge everything I was taught. And by the way, I still practice that same concept. Everything that comes into my sphere, I challenge the information before I accept it as true. So after challenging the information, the community that I came from rejected the New Testament entirely, even to the extent that they said that Jesus, whom we call Yeshua, didn't even exist. One of my teachers, if I can quote him verbatim, he said he's as fake as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So you have to imagine, coming from a school of thought that taught so hard against the New Testament, yes, I never challenged it for many years, but it was when I began to challenge information and I began to research, there was some very, very tough things that I found. And here's the first thing that I found, my brother. In my community, which rejects the narrative of Jesus as being a historical person, I found out through research you could do a better job of proving that Jesus walked the earth than you could do proving Abraham walked the earth. Are you
Mm-hmm.
hearing me? That doesn't mean Abraham is not historical. But what I'm saying is Jesus is more written about, contemporary with his era, than anyone throughout history. That would be the last person that you want to challenge as being historical. There's far too much contemporary evidence that validates his historical walk.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that was the first position that I changed.
Okay.
Okay. And then I began to wrestle with whether or not the narratives which are said of him are true. And the more I penetrated the Gospels, which is where he speaks, the more I said, wait, this is not the docile, turn the other cheek guy that my temple and congregation painted him as. He was a warrior. When there were wicked among us and they were doing wickedness in the temple, he made a belt out of spikes, went in there, overturned the tables, and whipped the money changers. This wasn't the turn the other cheek guy that I was always told. This was a warrior. This was a revolutionary. This was someone who got some newfound respect from me. Then I began to study his teachings. And I said, but wait a hot minute. Because he sounds like several of the rabbis in the oral tradition. And that's hard for some people to wrestle because not everyone knows what the contents of the oral tradition reveal or teach. But when you know the oral tradition and you listen to the teachings of Jesus, you would know that in every instance where he was challenged for not keeping the law, it's because of the fact that the people challenging haven't fully grasped the law that they're critiquing him about. This man was a master of Torah exposition, so much so that his explanations literally went over the heads of many of the people of his generation. Remember, when he's introduced in the text of the New Testament, he gets up and he teaches on the Sabbath. And it says, all the rabbis and scholars and scribes marveled at the things that left his mouth. So clearly, he taught and revealed things that no scholar contemporary with him could understand. He was a child prodigy. Had a powerful mind. His discernment of Torah was so impactful that to this day he is used as the marker for that which is righteousness throughout the world, as so many people have taken on to his teachings. Having said that, my brother, the awakening that I have experienced in embracing his historicity has caused me to grow fond of not just the character, but of the morality and the scholarly mind, the masterful mind that he possessed. And that surmises some of my views. I want to say more, but I'm going to hold back because I'm actually going to be releasing a book on him soon, which is entitled The Messiah Codex. So
Okay.
I unfortunately must hold back, but I just want to say I literally could say so much more.
All right. So people definitely got to get that book. I know I'm gonna get the book because that was a big one for me. I questioned and wondered about Gamaliel, and so I did some research on him and going back to what is it, Hillel the Elder, and so just doing that kind of helps me understand a little bit that I do need to go and look at the oral tradition, and reading that also kind of helps me see Paul's position on certain things. Okay, in that regard, what is your take on Paul and that connection from the Maccabean era, the Jews and the Edomites being converted over, just from that perspective, along with Herod being the first Edomian king, to the Roman appointed authorities within Israel and Judea, that leads to Paul's teaching coming from that house, versus these are people that are instituted or still within the Levitical community that is being the priest, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I'll begin where you began. I'll begin with Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel, the teacher of Paul or Saul of Tarsus, this is a man who is an immense of a giant of a scholar of Torah. Uh, you don't get the term rabbi because you said a couple of things that were intelligent. You get the term rabbi because you've had an impact in your era on your community and in people's lives. You get the title rabbi because you have changed people's lives. Contrary to popular opinion, the title rabbi is a title that comes through a person ritually or comes to a person ritually. Um, the language that is used to describe how someone comes into that office, um, we describe that as laying someone's hands or laying of your hands upon this person, which symbolizes conferring authority. All right. So, what's highly significant about this is that you'll find that when a rabbi is a rabbi, he's said to have semika. That's what it's referred to. Ritual ordination is called semika in Hebrew, which means the laying of the hands, which is the conferral of authority and power. Remember, they even wanted and attempted to call Jesus rabbi, but he rejected it. He said, call no man good but the Father who is in heaven. And he rejected the notion of anyone calling him rabbi. But he was deserving of it, hence why people attempted to call him rabbi. So in looking at Ramban Gamliel and knowing that he's a doctor of the law, which is what the New Testament says he is, remember, There's a trial that occurs with the apostles, and Paul's teacher is called to give testimony, Rabbi Gamliel. And they say, what should we do with these people? They are following after Jesus the Nazarene in his teachings. What should we do? And he said, if the thing be of God that they are doing, if it be of God, it will succeed. If it is not of God, it will not succeed. And with those wise words, they let those men go because common sense set in that moment. Why are we trying and going out of our way to condemn Israelites for views that we may or may not understand as average and normal men? Leave it to God. Let God be the judge of the matter. So long as people follow morality and principles, why are we demonizing people for their beliefs? Why are we ready to kill people for their beliefs? If a person practices righteousness, high ethics, and morality, yes, you can have opposing views from me and still be my brother. Something the Israelite community could learn from. Because the source of division in our community is not even the fact that we don't keep Torah. Most of it is, oh, you believe the Sabbath is on Monday. Oh, you believe that the moon dictates when the feasts come in. Oh, you believe that this is how this particular law should be followed or this particular book should be translated. Most of our discrepancies are fickle. So in retracing the steps of these early pioneers, these doctors of the law, we have to understand that even with regard to the era of Herod, as great as the Edomite king Herod was, he wasn't so great that he could usurp the authority of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin were a powerful body of elders and scholars who became the framers of what we're calling the oral tradition. So even though Herod comes to power, even though he clearly is against us as a people, he still could not usurp the authority of those body of men known as the Sanhedrin, who were highly capable of performing everything necessary to adjudicate that divine law, the Torah given to us on Mount Sinai. So I think what's important in this particular discussion at this moment to really hone in on, and since we're talking about our oral tradition with respect to these generations, first thing we have to ask ourselves is this. Notice that when Rabbi Gamliel is introduced in the New Testament, the New Testamenters call him a doctor of the law. They did not say among the Pharisees he's known as a doctor of the law. They simply call him a doctor of the law. Mind you, he's one of the main teachers of the oral tradition. That means the New Testament writers clearly cannot be in opposition to the oral tradition if they are so easily ready to describe this man as a doctor of the law, knowing all he teaches is the oral tradition. That's something that escapes the mind of a lot of our people. Having said that, you also recall in the book of Acts that it says to go from the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem is a Sabbath day journey. I got a question for the listening audience. Where in the entire Torah are we taught or commanded on how far to travel on the Sabbath? What are the New Testament writers speaking of when they say a Sabbath day's journey is the distance between the Mount of Olives and the Jerusalem? Don't they know that's oral tradition? Because it's only found in the oral tradition that you're allowed to travel 2,000 amot, which is the unit of measure used in the oral tradition. This is generally referred to as Tikkun Shabbat, which is called the Shabbat boundary. You're only allowed to travel 2,000 amot. That's the unit of measure, that's the distance. But the New Testament writers are so comfortable with this oral tradition that they clearly use it to measure the distance between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem, which if you're paying attention, it has to mean that they're following the oral tradition. So much so that they use some of its teachings as a unit of measure. Think about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the more we penetrate the scriptures, the more we see these things come alive, The African connection is also unique. Like you mentioned, the Ethiopian eunuch, right? We know that the Ethiopian church is the oldest church. We know that. We know one of the oldest Bibles, and by Bible I mean the inclusion of the New Testament, is the Ethiopian Bible. We know that there's a work called the Kebra Negast, the glory of the kings, which began as Ethiopian oral tradition, but finally comes into writing and it's called the Kebra Negast, which details the account of the earliest history and genesis of Ethiopians or the people of Cush, with a heavy emphasis on Makeda, Queen Makeda, or as the Bible calls her, the Queen of Sheba, and Solomon. Except in the Kebra Nagas, they mention something that the Bible maybe hints towards. The Bible says King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba everything that she asked for. I'm going to say it again. The Bible says he gave to the Queen of Sheba everything that she asked for without telling you exactly what she asked for. Some women are so fond of the knowledge, wisdom of men that they may ask for your hand in marriage. They may ask to be the mother of your child. In the Ethiopian tradition, they say that Menelik is a contraction of the term Melech, from the king. So they teach in Ethiopian tradition that the Queen of Sheba, who they call Queen Makeda, had a son with King Solomon called Menelik. Before then, the Ethiopian aristocracy was female. After their tradition records that she had a son with Solomon, it was now patriarchal men. As the tradition continues, they say that King Solomon sent emissaries and even Levites with them, to the extent that there are some people that believe that the Ark of the Covenant was sent with the Queen of Sheba because Solomon, through the spirit of prophecy, knew what would happen with Nebuchadnezzar coming to ransack the temple. And had that Ark of the Covenant been there, that would have definitely been stolen. And to show you that no heathen king captured the Ark of the Covenant, notice the Bible lists item by item everything that King Nebuchadnezzar took. But the Ark of the Covenant is not on that register. It's not on that list, which means our tradition says that the good King Josiah hid it, and he hid it under a labyrinth deep underneath the temple grounds, which is highly probable. But I just want the community to know the Ethiopians, the Falasha, they have their own tradition as well as to where that is. And there's actually an Ethiopian church in Ethiopia right now that stands guard 24/7 of a building they deem sacred for one reason and one reason only, because they say it houses the Ark of the Covenant.
Let's talk about the Merneptah Stele. And you
Oh,
recently posted that on your page that you just received that in the mail. Let's talk a little bit about
mhm.
that.
Oh, we definitely can talk about that. So I actually have a copy, a replica, a miniature replica of the Merneptah Stele actually here with me, with the original Medu inscriptions on it. Now, the original Merneptah Stele, which actually references the name Israel, this would have been at least 12 feet tall. And it's made of black granite, which is what this is actually made of, black granite as well. This is a very, very expensive buy. This was shipped to me directly from Cairo, from the Cairo Museum. The Cairo Museum has several replicas of many ancient artifacts. The Merneptah Stele is one of them. The Merneptah Stele is so famous because on lines 25 through 28, on one of those lines records the name Israel. There's a pharaoh by the name of Meri Ptah, which stands for the beloved of the god Ptah. That name comes into English as Merneptah. He records that on his Asiatic campaign, when he comes into Canaan, he says that after he defeats the Libyans, who the first 24 lines of the stela deal with, on lines 25 through 27, right here, he records that he entered Canaan and he encountered Israel and he destroyed them and left them without seed. But there's a problem because the Merneptah Stele is about the 13th century BCE, which is the 1200s. We know that King David is historical because we find inscriptions bearing his name. Having said that, King David is not on the world scene for another 200 years, yet Merneptah writes on his stela that he decimates the seed of Israel, leaves them with no seed, virtually kills every single one of us. So what's some of the things we're learning? The first thing we learn is that just because something is recorded in stone in Egypt doesn't make it the truth. The second thing we learn is that look no further for evidence of a historical Israel than Egypt itself, because our name is recorded on the Merneptah Stele. This is the oldest mention of the name of Israel outside of the Bible and the world.
Man, that's powerful. For you to even have that in your possession, I could just only imagine how you feel or you felt when
Mm,
it hit the mailbox. When
man,
you put it in your hands.
listen, I got something else coming that is huge, brother. It's huge. There's something called the 400-year stela, erected by Ramses II. Scholars say they're baffled as to the contents on the stela. They're not sure what the stela is describing. They say, to the best of their ability, it appears that the stele is celebrating 400 years since the Hyksos or Asiatics or Hebrews came into Egypt. Now, when you check the contents of the stela, you find the god Baal mentioned, but he's called Set, which is normal because the Egyptians would rename foreign gods often. So the Egyptian counterpart to the Canaanite deity Baal is called Set, and the older name is Sutek, but it's the same person. We're talking about the Baal in the land of Canaan is called Set or Sutek to the Egyptians. Now he's honored on the 400-year stele for sure, but there's a reason why they're honoring him. You see, the Egyptians were confused on who really was this God that decimated Egypt. The 400-year stela also commemorates and also shows and proves that the Egyptians tried to worship the God that destroyed the Egyptians, which is unique because the Merneptah Stele mentions the year 400 since the Amu, which is the Metanetra or hieroglyphic term for Asiatics, or i.e. Hebrews. The 400-year stela says this is to commemorate the 400 years of the Amu being in Egypt. My brother, I got one question for you. What other Asiatic group of people in any literary work speak of having a 400 year of enslavement in Egypt other than the Hebrews?
It ain't but one group of people. And
Ain't but
that's why
one.
we here, brother. That's
And
why
that's
we
why
here,
we're here. And
man.
that's why we're here. And when
It's-
that come, I'm going on Sonnet of TV.
that is, it's I mean, these are facts, you know what I'm saying? And this is what it takes, man, to present the fact, to hold your ground. And that's what I
Mm-hmm.
respect about you, bro, is that you hold your ground no matter what ring you
No.
are put in.
Oh yeah.
As a
Oh yeah.
debater, as a person that defends the faith,
That's
I can
right.
just imagine how the Most High Yah respects you in that regard to being that type of soldier out here on this battlefield, because that's what you are. I don't know if you realize that or you know that, but you are definitely a soldier, bro, and you have some real blows for the people.
Thank you,
So I
man.
suggest people go and check your page out, go read your video. I mean, watch your videos, because there's a wealth of knowledge there on your page, man. That just it's amazing, bro. And I appreciate you for doing what you do. I
Thank you,
appreciate
man. Thank you.
you.
I want to say one of the things
Yeah.
that, and I'm gonna say this very brief. One of the things that attracted me to the Bible, being a teenager who was of the streets at the time, was to realize that wait, when I was in church, they didn't tell us that King David was a warrior. They just read all the psalms that he composed, which showed you his more scholarly and spiritual side. We didn't really just took heads off in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
When I came into the Israelite community, we talked about men like Samson. We talked about men that was nice with their hands as well. To know that the men of God were not just spiritual men, were not just intellectual men, but were also what we call today a man's man, capable of going upside your head if you get it twisted. Let me tell you,
That's right.
brother, as a young man growing up in the gritty streets of Brooklyn, New York in the early 90s. You know what New York was like in the 90s?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's like being in, listen, Beirut in the 80s, being in Iraq during the Iraq War. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was turned up in New York City. You see it in the rap music at the time. Look at the groups that we had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to open that Bible at that time in my life, well, the only thing I really respected was the gangsters in the street. When I saw that there were men of God that were righteous and gangster where need to be, I said, this is what I want.
Mm. Mm. And that's exactly what you see.
I'm I'm willing to put this aside, but ain't
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with keeping a little gangster in me too.
It's interesting, bro. Like I was in I was in Brooklyn. I didn't live in Brooklyn. I lived in New Jersey, and so
Ooh, ooh,
at 16, I was coming from Jersey, taking the train up
mm,
there, to Brooklyn, and
mm-hmm,
I had a this is the most memorable moment was me and some guys, we got on the train. He went to where did he go? But anyway, long story short, I missed my stop coming
mm-hmm,
to Brooklyn. I missed my stop coming to Brooklyn, and the stop I was supposed to get off on, whatever, was supposed to have me closer to Nostrand and Gates. Put it like that. All right. And
ooh,
so I got off the wrong exit, and I believe I was in Brownsville right behind it. And so I had to walk up, I had to walk
ooh.
up the block. And so when I got there, those brothers was like, bro, like, yo, where you coming from? Like, don't you ever do that again.
I
This was in
remember.
like 96, 97, something like that. It might have been about 94, but I could just remember, but just there, because I'm from Georgia, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm
Mhm.
living a movie. I'm
Right,
living a movie in New York, man. Like I was having the time of my life. Tall buildings,
of
like
course.
the army fatigues. I bought me some
Oh
Tim.
yeah. Oh
You know what
man.
I'm saying? Like bro, like I still kind of had the accent a little bit because I'm just connected. You know what
I
I'm
can
saying?
hear it.
Like I learned about 5%ers. You know what I'm saying? Like
Oh
I
yeah.
used to
Oh yeah.
rap. I used to rap. I was with some 5%ers or whatnot, and you know what I'm saying, like the knowledge. You know what I mean, that those brothers was kicking to me. I never heard people talk about the power that a black man has, and for you
Mm-hmm.
to say this about the Israelites, I'm even more intrigued about it because that's how I felt.
That's right.
And when I read the story of David, David, he wasn't playing either.
Oh
He
no.
authored a lot of heads.
That's right.
And he had to be that gangster, but and just to see how things played out for him, and how things are gonna end for him,
Mm-hmm.
it's beautiful.
Oh
So
yeah.
you being that type of lion out here is most respected by the Most High Yah, because that's how he respected David. You
That's
know what
right.
I'm saying? And so
That's right.
I sent you a scripture, asking you about this, and what David
Mm-hmm.
looks like in the end times. Jeremiah 30:8-9. It says, "In that day declares the Lord of hosts, I will break the yoke from off your neck, and I will rip off your bonds. Strangers shall no longer make slaves of them. Instead, they shall serve the Lord their God and David, the king, whom I will raise up for them." There are other scriptures out there, but what is your take on this scripture and David's position in the kingdom?
So this is a very powerful read for a number of reasons. David's reign was so important to the shaping of kingship, not just for the era he lived in, but David was actually um, a person whose life, whose walk was a foreshadow of the messianic king to come. There are people that believe, because of verses like the verse you just read, that King David himself will be resurrected and will return in the flesh. While there are others that believe that the Messiah to come is an avatar of David, or to break it or simplify it a little bit more, he's a reincarnation of David, meaning that the Mashiach that's coming as a king to judge the nations will certainly come with the very spirit of David. Hence why the Creator says, "And David, my prince, shall be ruler of this people." Having said that, you do find scholarly contention as to whether that should be taken literal, as in King David himself coming back, or whether that should be taken allegorical. Um, I lean on the side of allegory because I have yet to meet a man that came back in the flesh. So that would be obviously a hard thing for me to wrestle with. However, I think it's very possible to the Mashiach or the Messiah to come with the very spirit of David. Absolutely. Because I know that all of us as living descendants, we are the renewed spirit of our ancestors. So the Mashiach will be the renewed version of David, the renewed spirit of David coming in, absolutely the spirit of David. And in that respect, he can absolutely be called David.
Most definitely, my brother. I appreciate you, man. Like, we can go on for days, hours, and just talking this, because this is just how much embedded I am into this study. I definitely want to, invite you back. We touched on a lot. I feel that we can, continue on, but I definitely don't be a stranger, my brother. You know what I mean? Like, this is a platform for you to be able to express anything that you want to express. This is this is your home away from home. You know what I mean? Like,
Thank
we're gonna
you.
build it in that regard for the Israelite community, so that we can, and I get it. There's other platforms out there that provides different styles of entertainment, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but here I want to focus more on, building this
Yes,
and continue painting it in a great light, because there
of
are so
course.
many other individuals out there that can paint it in such a bad light, and people run away from this truth, and so I want to make sure we have a platform that, provides this type of energy.
Oh yeah, we should definitely have something that is for us, that is by us, that merits us.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
The other platform that I'm known to or I'm mostly seen on, that's for debating. That's for purpose of dealing with those who threaten, or as they say today, come for our belief, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I use that other platform for, is to defend our community against anybody on the outside trying to come for our community. But when I have the opportunity to be on an Israelite platform, I'm always in rare form if you ask the right questions.